Hey everyone, FPL Pricey, otherwise known as Sam here, and we are finally back with FPL for the 24-25 season. Of course, the game isn't launched yet, but with player prices being revealed pretty much at an hourly basis right now, it's got to be soon, right? It's got to be in the next few days. Ideally, it's going to be after tomorrow, after England, Spain and the Euros final. We will, of course, be talking about that at some point in this video. I think you probably know which way my allegiances lie, although my parents do live in Spain as well, so, you know, it may not be the end of the world. Anyway, FPL is hopefully going to be back, you would think, next week. It could be today, it could be tomorrow, but considering some of the other insider info and some of the press releases they put out, you'd think it's going to be after Tuesday, because they did mention that player prices and reveals would be happening until about Tuesday afternoon. So maybe Tuesday evening, maybe Wednesday, maybe Thursday, but it's definitely in the next few days. And of course, we've got plenty to chat about today on the show. If you're watching along live, please let me know in the chat that you are doing so. It'd be great to see you. A lot of familiar faces in the chat already. River and Freddie already saying hi. And thank you very much, River. I got this in Naples the other day. Apparently, I got it on the first day it was released. I didn't realise this at the time, but there were a lot of people walking around the streets staring at me. I thought it was just because I had something on my face. It was actually because it was a brand new top and no one had seen it yet. So that was quite special. And I've just so happened to be watching the England-Switzerland game that day in Napoli as well, which was pretty cool. Let me know what you've been up to during the summer as well, whether you've been up to anything exciting. Little life update from me. I got engaged over the summer, so that was huge. And of course, Southampton got promoted to the Premier League. So we'll be talking about them today as well. Adam Armstrong is going to be hopefully a factor at some point this season. Already one comment in the chat about him, but it's just great to be back. It's great to be streaming again. I've really missed it. I might be a bit rusty today. Let me know in the chat if any settings seem wrong or if anything needs updating, because I'm sure I've missed something. But whatever happens, this is going to be fun. I should be around for a good 90 minutes, maybe even 2 hours, if there's enough people in the chat and there's a bit of a back and forth. We can have a good chinwag about everything. In the meantime, though, maybe let's have a look at some of the prices that got revealed so far. So, we've got to start with Haaland, right? 15 million. It was the first release at 12 o'clock, I think on Thursday? Was it Thursday? I think it was Thursday. But that really got the juices flowing. And to be honest, I don't know about you. I'll ask a poll in the chat in a minute whether or not you agree. But Haaland, is he overpriced at 15 million? I think personally it makes this game way more interesting this season, because previously, okay, first season he wasn't going to be massively over the top in the price, but last season at 14 still probably wasn't really enough to put us off him in game week 1. Maybe 15 million's not either. Maybe 15 million is still doable, but I think it's raised enough doubts that now, especially when you look at other assets that are rising in price, we'll talk about Cole Palmer in a minute, of course, it does make it really difficult to squeeze together a really balanced squad with Haaland in it. 15 million, I think, is actually a really smart price from FPL, so props to them. I think we gave them a little bit of props last season for raising Trent's price. It did sadly, on the whole, make him relatively irrelevant, I guess you would say, over the season, but there were still moments where he could be of use. I would expect Trent to come back down a little bit this year after last season, but Haaland obviously getting the 1 million boost I think is going to be incredibly interesting, and there's going to be a big discussion whether or not he is going to be in your game week 1 side. So I'll start it off with a poll in the chat. Let me know what you think of that. Will Haaland be in your game week 1 side? I have to admit, as it stands, based on the pricing we've got so far, I am pretty tempted to say I might be going without him to start off with. That is bold. In game week 2, he's got Ipswich, so that is going to be an absolute prime candidate for captaincy. But at 15 million, is he going to be worth it when you can, going without him, probably squeeze in the likes of Saka, Palmer, Foden, Salah as well, and we've got plenty of good strikers this season as well at what seemed like pretty good prices. Watkins up at 9 million now, I believe. Isak, I don't believe we've got the price for yet, although it might happen whilst I'm streaming, so do let me know if there are any prices that are revealed during the stream, because it would be great to have those broken live on air as well. In the meantime though, let me know in the poll whether or not you will be owning Haaland in game week 1. Obviously, this doesn't lock you into anything. I'm not locking myself into anything at this point. And at some stage in this stream, I'll probably run through a very sort of off-the-cuff draft, because I haven't actually had a look on FPL team yet. I will be doing that live on air later in this show. And we can hopefully start building a team based on some probably predicted prices as well as real prices later on in this show. In the meantime, though, let's move on from Haaland. Let me know in the chat what you think of his price, though, and do remember to vote on the poll, and we'll come back to that in just a moment's time. But let's start moving through some of the other prices. This is in no order whatsoever. I've just got a carousel going, but I'll scroll across. As you can see, they're all just screenshots at the moment. I haven't done anything fancy with the graphics just yet. Like I said, bit rusty. Hopefully you like the new background and the layout and all of that, though. Do let me know in the chat if you prefer that to last season's. Hopefully it's a bit of an upgrade. But I'm trying to scroll through to Mo Salah. There we go. Mo Salah, 12.5. Perfect. Now, personally, again, I think this is the correct price for him. I think it's just enough. Oh, okay. Apparently, Liverpool prices have dropped. I will be dragging them onto screen in just a moment's time then. In the meantime, let's start with Salah. 12.5. It will be interesting to see whether he's good value for money this season. Obviously, under new management, I think personally he's more likely to be playing an inside forward role than a classic winger role. So he might be, if not as effective, even more effective this season. But there will be other things going on. Will he keep penalties? Will he still be getting the same amount of minutes? Will Slot look to maybe sort of bring through a new era of Liverpool players? Obviously, Salah's probably going to be off at the end of the season, or you would think. So will he look to maybe bring through some players and maybe buy players to start looking for the future? Now, personally, I think Mo Salah is well priced here, and he is almost certainly going to be in my Game Week 1 side, especially because of their Game Week 1 fixture against Ipswich. I think that's probably, for me personally anyway, slightly too good to ignore. Now, again, let's have a look at the other Liverpool prices, because people are mentioning them in the chat. Apparently, Trent is 7. I actually quite like that. And Gakpo at 7.5. Now, I wonder if I change the screen in just one moment. Again, live on air is not easy to do. I don't think I've done this too many times. So apologies if this doesn't work, but I'm going to bring up the live FPL. Or actually, maybe I'll just bring up Twitter. Hang on. Let me bring that up for you. Have we got live prices? We must do. There we go. We do have live prices. Perfect. So, Liverpool, I'm seeing this for the first time just like you. So, Gakpo at 7.5. It's interesting. I don't mind it. If he starts nailing down that starting spot, then it's fantastic. But it's quite hard to know at this point whether or not that's going to be good value, because you just don't know whether Slot is going to have him as a regular starter or not. If he is, then again, him at 7.5 is fantastic value for money. Let me know in the chat if you agree with that. But Nunez matching his price at 7.5. We all know what happens next. We're going to pick him in Game Week 1. He's going to not be able to hit a barn door again. It's going to be very difficult to bear with him for another season if he doesn't start finding the back of the net consistently. The data, as always, is going to be amazing. I'm sure of it. But will Slot back him for long enough and give him 90 minutes week in, week out? I'm not so sure at this point. And I don't know if we can be before we start seeing Liverpool in competitive matches at the start of the season. So that's going to be really difficult to know. And I think for me, it's probably going to be an avoid on both of those players based on what we've seen so far, of course, because we just don't know who the preferred centre forward is going to be at this moment. And maybe just go safe with Mo Salah. Trent is obviously going to be a starter at 7 million. It's whether or not he's going to be good enough value for money looking at some of the other expensive players that we've got in our sides. Is he going to be worthwhile to have at 7 million when we're already pretty squeezed on budget? Maybe you want to squeeze in Haaland as well. It's a good price. It's a competitive price. And at times he's definitely going to be in my side. From Game Week 1 though, despite Liverpool's really, really good start to the season, I don't know. Let me know in the chat what you think, actually. But anyway, so moving through the other two, McAllister at times last season was maybe slightly interesting, but 6.5 doesn't really get the juices flowing for me too much. I'm not that bothered by that. And Van Dijk at 6 is a nice, slightly cheaper alternative than Trent with less attacking upside. So I think they've priced that pretty much correctly because, again, with both of those forwards, it's going to be hard to know which one starts. If you want to take a gamble, 7.5 is a good price to do so. But at times they could switch in and out. They've obviously got depth down the left wing, through the centre and on the right now. So are they going to be consistent, relatively reliable starters? I'm not so sure. Anyway, so for now, let's go back to the... There we go. Let's go back to the player prices because I want to talk not only about the 2 premiums we've got as always, but we've also got a 3rd premium this season already. And I expect there to be a number of other premiums coming over the next few days. But let's come up with Chelsea. Hopefully it's not too far away. I think it's at the start here. Perfect. Palmer at 10.5. That is officially the biggest price rise of any player from season to season in FPL history. So again, we kind of predicted this. We didn't maybe predict him to be 10.5 million. That is a very, very high price. I actually think it's a good price for Palmer, but it is a high price. It's a 5.5 million hike, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. But he's deserved it, right? He's on penalties. He's going to be in a system under Maresca that should ideally suit him pretty well. He's obviously going to be a 90-minute man, and the underlying data was very good, even without the penalties as well. There was a little bit of a notion towards the start of when he really started exploding, came onto the scene very quickly. There were a lot of penalties in there. But I think we can all kind of move past that now. I don't think he's a penalty merchant. I don't think that that's going to be a problem for him moving forwards. And personally, I think Palmer is going to be very good value for money, even at 10.5 million this season. Whether or not he's essential, and I personally don't think any player is essential, by the way, but whether or not he's going to be 80-90% owned in game week 1 is a completely different matter. He will be an option, and a very good one at that, but now he's in the same sort of realm as probably Saka, probably Foden, probably probably Salah as well, 2 million more, maybe even De Bruyne too. It's going to be quite tough to pick 2 of them alongside a Haaland, for instance. It's going to be very difficult. So you have to really nail your colours to a mast pretty early on and then be happy to move between them throughout the season, I think. Or at least that's the way I see it occurring at the moment. And again, this is another reason that maybe I'm tempted to go without Haaland or without Salah, one of them, and be able to get more value for money across the board, a stronger 11 with the likes of Palmer and Saka and Foden. Not so sure it's going to be possible. We'll find that out together later on in the stream when I do my team draft. For now, let's go back to the chat very quickly because I realise I haven't said hi to a lot of you in the chat. Nick, Andy Mack as well. Great to see you in the chat. It's so good to be back. It's so good to see you again. Obviously, Bateman as well on his wife's account. Okay, that's why I didn't recognise the handle, but it's great to have you here as well. Thank you so much for your support on the channel so far as well. I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you all for the heads up on Liverpool prices. I wouldn't have caught that otherwise. So yeah, big thank you to all of you. Obviously, River as well mentioned Gakpo's Holland form. Now, that is so true. He's been fantastic in the Euros. He's taken it up another step, and Slot's not an idiot. He's going to see that. He's going to know that he can use him in a very proactive manner, even if it's off the left, which I think at times he did play quite well. So I think Gakpo is an option. It's just whether or not he's going to be nailed in for 90 minutes regularly enough, especially when we look at some of the other players, and we'll come on to the forwards in just a moment's time, but some of the other players in the forward line that are 8-9 million are probably also still relatively good value for money. So it's going to be really interesting to find the balance. And when you've got strikers at 7.5 million, the bonus really is if they're on penalties, and neither Gakpo or Nunez will be. So that's just another small asterisk against them, where with someone like Isak, for instance, he'll probably come in at 8.59, maybe, you'd imagine. On penalties is probably going to be a slightly better option for me anyway at this time. And they've got Southampton in game week 1. So yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have Isak or Gordon, if not both, in game week 1. We'll come on to Southampton in a bit. I'm very happy to be promoted. I'm very happy to be in the Premier League. I'm saying it like I'm playing for them. Obviously, I'm happy they're in the Premier League. I'm not going to be one of those guys who says it's us, it's my doing. But yeah, anyway, so Palmer, 10.5 million, is that fair? Do you think that's fair? I'm going to run a quick poll. I'm going to end the Haaland poll. It seems like 58% of you, by the looks of it, just over half, actually think you would have him in your Game Week 1 side at the moment. So again, that's quite high, but it's also pretty telling that the price is competitive because it's about 50-50. Some people are going to go without him, some are going to go with him. I do have a sneaky suspicion that a lot of us will end up with him, including myself, not necessarily out of fear, but more just so we don't make a really big error in the first few game weeks and fall massively behind. I think that is something that needs to be spoken about more when you get to game week 1 at the start of a season. It's quite hard to recover if you fall 20-30 points behind early on, and what a lot of us end up doing is starting to force the issue a little bit too much. I started to do that at the back end of last season because I didn't make the ground up early on, and there were small mistakes that I didn't correct quickly enough. And I think Haaland might be one of those that, okay, you might be able to bet on it and it goes really, really right for you if you go without him, of course. But the flip side could be excruciatingly horrible. Obviously, he could pop off against Chelsea in game week 1. And by the time you get to game week 2, it's Ipswich. And all of a sudden you need a hit to get to him. And probably you're ripping apart your midfield to do so. It's going to be difficult to see a world in which Haaland isn't going to score well this season. It's just whether or not you can cover him with the other 11 players that you've picked. Personally, I'm tempted to go without him at the moment, but the stream is split as it stands, and I completely understand that. I could go either way. I really could. And when we get closer to game week 1, I'm sure that nervous energy will creep in. I'll see a lot of threads. I'll see a lot of probably like Instagram posts of Haaland saying like ready to go, can't wait, etc., etc. And it's going to be inevitable that he's going to do well anyway. So moving on, we've only had the 3 premiums so far. So let's move down a category. And I think the next player or players I wanted to talk about, I can't remember where they are. There are 30 slides here just for your information. So if I take a while scrolling through them, my bad, but there are so many to go through. I'm looking for Ollie Watkins. Now, hopefully he's pretty soon. He wasn't soon at all. He was miles away. Where is he? Where is he? There he is, finally. Now, okay, before we get onto the price, before we get onto anything else, how good was that goal? How good was that goal? Where were you? What were you doing? If you're English, of course. Oh my God. I don't think I've been so happy with a goal, well, actually since the playoff final, so maybe not that long anyway, but absolutely incredible. What a finish. If it went anywhere else, if he hit that in any other part of the goal, there's no way it was going in. One touch to get it through the defender's legs, just absolutely incredible. And what a season he's had leading up to the Euros as well, by the way. And that kind of leans me into the FPL chat again. 9 million for me, even without penalties, and that's a discussion in itself, he might be back on them, could be a really good price still. Obviously, he was, I believe, the player with the most attacking returns last season. He wasn't obviously the highest point scorer, that was Palmer, but I believe that Ollie Watkins was going at an attacking return per game last season. And honestly, even with Aston Villa competing in the Champions League, I would expect him to still do around about that, if not maybe a slight drop off, and 9 million is still going to be great value for money, in my personal opinion. Now, obviously, 9 million for a striker who's not on penalties historically doesn't usually go too well, but now with Douglas Luiz out of the side, he's gone to Juventus, I'm pretty sure. I believe that Ollie Watkins has a relatively good chance of being back on them. Now, whether or not that's a good thing, again, is up for debate because he had a pretty sketchy record at taking penalties for Villa, and he got taken off of them for Douglas Luiz because his record wasn't amazing. But he is a striker. He is going to be hungry for those extra goals to beef up his stats. And you would think in the last year, and especially over the period of the Euros where he hasn't been starting too much, there was always a chance that he was going to have to take a penalty at some point in the campaign. He's probably been practicing them quite a lot in the last few months. So is he going to want to be on penalties? I think so. Is he going to get them? That's up for debate. Either way, The stats are good enough that I think 9 million is still a good price. I don't think he's necessarily nailed in as a starter for me from game week 1, but I think he will be a major factor once again in FPL this season, and I can see him nestling nicely into a front three for us at times, whether or not that's as part of a 3, part of a 2, maybe with a 4.5 million forward that's kind of just bench fodder. I'm not so sure at this moment, but the 9 million again is a pretty decent upswing in price, and it's going to squeeze our budget once again. So those budget enablers, if you want the likes of Ollie Watkins, Isak as well, you'd imagine is around about that. It's going to be pretty difficult to do so with a balanced squad. So there's going to be a lot of discussion, or a lot more discussion, I believe, with some of the promoted sides and some of the lesser Premier League sides, maybe the lower half of the table. We're finally going to get assets from those sides that are going to be more interesting this season based on the prices we've seen so far. Obviously, we do need to see Arsenal. We do need to see more of Man United. We need to see more of Spurs as well. And of course, Man City, who could forget as well. So it is going to be obviously dependent on all of those factors. But from what we've seen so far, I would imagine it's going to be a bit more of a squeeze on budget. Now, let's have a look at the chat again, because I kind of go from here to here, so I get distracted. So I am sorry if I've scrolled through the chat and and I've missed you out. But let's have a very quick look. Vardy. Now, that's an interesting one. Let's go back to Leicester, which I believe is here at 5.5 million. Niels in the chat, hopefully I've pronounced your name right. So sorry if not, let me know how to pronounce it if I've got that wrong. But 5.5 is a good price. I do have some bad news though, personally, as someone who watched a lot of Championship football last season. I would be relatively surprised if he's a regular 90-minute man this season. I don't think he's that guy anymore, sadly. Obviously, when he's on the pitch, great statistics, great underlying data per 90. He's still got that burst of pace. He's still a very, very clinical finisher. So when he's on, fantastic. But I think Leicester are going to use him as a bit of an elder statesman this season, in my personal opinion. And whether or not he gets enough 90 minutes to make 5.5, obviously it's pretty cheap. It is very cheap. But you do want a regular starting player. And I think it could be difficult. I might be wrong, obviously. We don't know yet. And they do have a new manager as well. Cooper might see things differently. But in the Premier League, you need more legs in behind. And Vardy, I don't know if he can do that anymore for 90 minutes at a time. And they do have another few decent options at Leicester. And the way they're going to want to play, I think they're going to need a lot more legs to survive in the Premier League. So, yeah, at times he'll be worth it. But I do want the Vardy party once or twice next season. I'd love to own him again, especially at that price. But I think for me, it's going to be difficult to go with him. And yeah, he'll get the odd cameo goal as well. And maybe if we're able to have a strong bench, he can come in every now and then. That would be fantastic. But predicting and knowing when those cameos are going to pay off, historically for me anyway, is going to be quite hard work. And has been quite hard work for me. I've tried it before and I've just never made it work for me. But yeah, absolutely, at 5.5, it makes it a price that is definitely tempting at the very least, and possibly even something that a lot of managers will consider as that third striker option, because as we mentioned, and as Niels mentioned in the chat as well, there are some very expensive players like Haaland who probably aren't going to be value for money. Whether or not they're good players is a completely different matter, but value-wise, we're going to need to beef up our squads with other outside players, and Vardy could definitely fit into that. So let's have a look at, well, we can kind of go through one by one at the moment. I don't want to get bogged down in too many specific teams, but the rest of Leicester, obviously, they've signed Cordova-Reid as well at 5.5. Maybe at some point going to be an option. Personally, probably not looking at him just yet. Daka at 5 million, if he becomes a regular starter under new management, that could be really, really decent. I do like that, possibly even more than Vardy, but equally, we're not guaranteeing starts at the moment. We don't know who's going to be starting up front for Leicester just yet. And Daka, if he's the guy, 5 million could be the budget forward of choice. No questions there. Moving on, let's have a look at Villa. So we've talked about Ollie Watkins, but two players here, maybe possibly three, that really caught my eye. Now, Maatsen is going to be the one that a lot of people are excited by, the new signing, 5 million. He's a very attacking defender, so that could be good value for money. But personally, the two that caught my eye, Konza at 4.5 million, regular starter, playing fullback quite a lot as well. Obviously a part-time England hero too, so a little bit of bias there too. But more so than him, Bailey as well could be a fantastic option at 6.5 million. For years now, we've lauded his underlying attacking data as absolutely elite numbers. Very, very good. I think he runs at well over 0.5 XGI per 90 season after season. And the problem for him has always been nailing down a regular starting spot, whether that's injury or rotation. That's always been an issue. But last season, he definitely took multiple steps up for Villa, became a more regular starter, and the person who he was most regularly competing with, Diaby, looks likely to be going off to Saudi Arabia. So he might be an option that's more nailed with great underlying data, and 6.5 million in a season where we're looking for budget enablers. He could be fantastic value for money, and I've got my eye on him as potentially a starter even from the off. Villa, obviously Champions League football, it's going to be tough to know how they'll deal with that, but it looks like they're buying pretty well so far, pretty smartly. They're adding depth and they're bringing in quality as well, and they look like a team that seriously don't look like they're going away anytime soon. And maybe they'll have a bit of Newcastle about them this season, where Newcastle obviously got Champions League. They did drop off a bit, but they were still competitive and they still had good options. They were still fighting for Europe. And if I had to nail my colours to a mast right now, that is what I would expect Villa to be like next season. So good options, plenty of attacking talent, and if you can pick a good nailed defender, especially one at 4.5 like Konza, clean sheets should be fairly regular too. So overall, I really like the prices for Villa. That could be a team that I look at targeting for good valued players and those sort of 10th, 11th men in our 11 to as regular starters, but to help pad out and balance our squad a little bit. So, oh yeah, to be fair, Niels as well mentioned Martinez at 5 million. I didn't mention him, but yeah, if he has a season like he did when he first broke onto the scene at Villa, 5 million could be a laughing stock. We do have two other keepers at 5 million already. They're probably miles away in this in this carousel. Oh, Pickford 1 at 5 million. Now, personally, I think Pickford is most likely to be my keeper going into Game Week 1 out of the options we've seen so far. He was the top scoring keeper last season. Everton's underlying defensive data was very, very positive for a side of their calibre, and he gets plenty of saves. And he's not too bad on bonus either because of that too. So when they keep a clean sheet, he tends to haul. He doesn't just get the 6 pointers like an Ederson or an Alisson or a Raya at Arsenal. If he gets a clean sheet, which is more rare than those other teams, but if he does, he's more likely to get a big haul and make up the difference for the less clean sheets. So 5 million, I think, is a fair price. He was going to get a rise, but I think it's also a price that is very tempting. And if there aren't any standout 4.5 keepers, which I'm struggling to really see at the moment, I think Pickford could be my guy going into Game Week 1 and just a bit of a set and forget. He's not losing his place anytime soon, let's face it. So again, maybe a little bit of an England bias going on there, but he was the top point scoring keeper last season. 5 million is still a good price in a decent defence with Sean Dyche. They're going to try and take another step up this season. And it doesn't look currently like they're going to lose Branthwaite either. So that defence is going to stay relatively solid with the same players making up that lineup as last season on the whole. So overall, I think he's a good keeper option. The other one, which I might be able to scroll to if he's close, but a Leno at 5 million, not so sure. I did have him for a bit last season. I didn't really love owning him, I'm not going to lie. He had the odd haul in him, but personally for me, I think it was a little bit of a love-hate relationship with Leno, and with Paulinho off to Bayern Munich, I do think they're just going to be a notch down on the defensive data, and I don't know whether 5 million is going to be good value for money for me. But again, let me know in the chat if you agree or disagree with that. Now, so let's have a look at who else did I want to talk about very quickly. So, oh yeah, the midfielders. So let's see how close we are to some of those. We do have Bruno Fernandes to start off with at 8.5. Now, again, it's not going to be a price that people immediately look at and think, oh, he has to be in my side. But he is on penalties. Man United okay, they were a bit of a laughing stock last season, but still got good data. He still came out of it with a pretty relatively good FPL score as well, and decent attacking returns. And they will be, you would think, slightly better off this season with the signings they're making. And Bruno Fernandes, good underlying attacking data, on penalties, 8.5 million. It's not a bad price, and I do think at times he's going to be an option for us, maybe even from the off, because Man United's fixtures to start off the season aren't terrible, and if you go with a structure without Salah or Haaland, so one of the two, you can spread those funds, those extra funds, across your 11, and Bruno could be one of those upgrades you could make. So you could afford a Bruno rather than maybe a 6.5, for instance. There are good 6.5s there, but none of which are going to be as reliable 90-minute men on penalties as Bruno with the same underlying attacking data. So he is going to be an option for me. But let me know in the chat who your favourite midfielder price is so far. I'm seeing Nkunku already in the chat, and I do agree. I think Nkunku could be a very, very good option at 6.5 million. And they've also obviously reclassified him as a midfielder, which I think is really interesting because coming into last season as a forward at 7.5, I think it was, I thought was in itself pretty cheap for a player of his pedigree from the Bundesliga. We do see a bit of Bundesliga tax operating for signings over from Germany to the UK to the Premier League straight away, more often than not. But I do get the feeling that he's a player that could be due for a breakout season if he can stay fit, and I do really like him. It's just whether or not, well, first of all, Maresca's going to play a different system. We don't know where he fits into that system yet. He is almost certainly going to be in their best 11 when he's fully fit, but they do have options. So that's one asterisk. The other asterisk is he hasn't been fit for over a year, pretty much on and off, but he hasn't been consistently fit for a year. So it's whether or not he's used this pre-season to build up that match fitness and whether he's going to be able to hit the ground running going into game week 1. I like to think he will be, because I'd love him to be an option that we can rely on at 6.5 million. But it might be one that maybe I just wait a couple of weeks on just to wait and see whether he's going to be good value for money. One player that I've paused on just through pure coincidence, but let's talk about him anyway, that I do really like the look of, even at 7.5 million, is Anthony Gordon. And I was saying to my WGTA, that's Who Got the Assist co-host, Tom, in the DMs the other day, that they need to be really careful with Gordon and Isak's pricing, because they're going to have a big enough difference, a big enough gap between the two of them to make Gordon worthwhile. Because if he's 7.5 and Isak's 8.5, there are loads of other midfielder options we do like, whereas there's not maybe so many forwards, and Isak's got the benefit of better underlying data and penalties. So I think if you're going to go for one of the two and Isak comes in at 8.5, that's only 1 million difference, and I'd probably be more tempted to go with Isak and bolster my midfield with other players rather than Gordon. You could, of course, go for both of them, and Southampton in game week 1, followed by a pretty decent run of fixtures after that as well. I wouldn't mind that as an option either. And Gordon's data last season was, I think, just a notch beneath 0.5 XGI per 90. That's not bad. It's not elite levels, but he was getting into good positions at the right time. And I do see him being able to match that, if not better that, again next season. So 7.5 is good value for money. It's just whether or not he's the standout option at that price point ahead of the likes of Jared Bowen, for example, at 7.5 as well, who has a 200-point finish in him, has been very reliable and often played out of position as a striker for West Ham, under new management as well, under Lopetegui, who might play him in a more advanced role too. So that's going to be a very, very difficult toss-up between the two of them. I don't believe West Ham have got a great opening to the season, so maybe you start with Gordon and you move across, but it's a really interesting price point, and 7.5 million all the way down to maybe 6 million is going to be where I think the difference is going to be made in a lot of our sides going into game week 1 across the first few game weeks. Picking the right one who gets off to a good start is going to be very difficult, and Gordon could be that reliable guy. You never know. Let's have another look at the chat very quickly, because I realise again it's kind of moved on. So Palmer, better than Palmer in terms of price for Nkunku, I'd assume. It is Nkunku. That could be a very good point. 4 million difference is a huge gap now. If it was still at a difference of maybe 1 or 2 million, then I think it would be Palmer, no doubt. But at 4 million, you might save the money. Go Nkunku. If he's a regular starter, that could be great value for money. And maybe not match Palmer's points, but in terms of the value that he offers, you can get 4 million's worth of extra points elsewhere and just go with Nkunku. I don't hate that as an option whatsoever. For me, it's just about knowing that he's a nailed 90-minute man like Palmer is going into game week 1. So, yeah, Gordon, as I've just mentioned, okay as well. I'd love to own Gordon in game week 1. It's just whether or not it fits the structure. And Bowen is also potentially a very good option too. Now, let's have a quick look at some other options. So Chelsea as well, that's one that we've had full price releases. Well, I say full. We've had one of those team price releases for. So we've got 5 of their options now. And one player that, okay, I'm not ready to go for him just yet, but I'm ready to be open to being hurt by Reece James again. At 5 million, that is a price, and FPL know what they're doing with this. It's a price that's just going to lure us back in enough that some of us are going to be tempted to go there and take that risk on fitness. Now, he was actually getting back up to full fitness at the end of last season, and then obviously he got the red card. Ultimate FPL troll, absolutely ridiculous timing. Got the red card and he's actually banned for the first 2 game weeks of this season, so he's definitely not an option in game week 1. But at 5 million, if he's had a good preseason, if he can remain fit for long enough, that is going to be an absolute bargain in a Maresca system. I really, really like that as an option. It's just, again, whether or not I'm ready to go through the turmoil of what it is to own someone like Reece James. It's a bit like owning Lucas Digne in the past as well. It's just constant up and down, up and down. You just never know what you're going to get. And more often than not, it ends up in heartbreak. So 5 million is just enough that it's going to draw a few people, maybe even myself, into owning him at times. And I already know it's going to be a mistake, but I'm ready to take that punt at some point this season. Let me know in the chat whether or not you would be open, not whether or not you're going to go for him, because I know he's banned for game week 1 and 2, and I know there's going to be a lot of hesitancy to being open to go for him again. But let me know if maybe there's a possibility that you'd be looking at him as an option in game week 3, 4, or at some point this season as well. Meanwhile, very quickly, before we move on, there are a couple of other options here that I'd like to talk about. Dewsbury Hall played really, really well under Maresca at Leicester last season, played in that 10, and his underlying data, go check it out if you get the chance. I don't have it on screen today, but I will be doing videos on all the promoted clubs and some of the new assets later on in the preseason, so I will be going into this in detail at a later point. But Dewsbury Hall's data was very, very encouraging last season. He got plenty of attacking returns. And 6 million, if Maresca likes him enough to make him a starter for Chelsea, could be an absolute joke of a price. It could be very, very good value for money. But again, it's 6 million for a reason. And that reason is they've got a lot of options that can play that 10 role. Obviously, namely Palmer and Nkunku as well. And is he going to be a regular starter? I don't know. It's hard to tell at this point. Jackson, on the other hand, Sterling, on the other hand, both at 7 and 7.5 respectively, reverse that, but respectively, are both decent enough prices. I think for me personally, I'm going to leave them to one side for the time being. Let me know in the chat if you do want me to go through them in a bit more detail in the preseason as well. For the time being, though, let's move on, because I realise I've already been streaming for 40 odd minutes and we haven't started looking at teams yet or any sort of meta chat. In the meantime, again, I haven't done a poll in a little while, so completely off topic, but just because I'm interested. I've got 2 more scheduled for today, but the first one I'm going to do is going to be about the promoted clubs. And I'm going to ask, which of the promoted clubs do you think... Oh, let me get that right. Clubs. Do you think will finish highest in the Premier League. So not necessarily which one's going to survive. It could be 18th, 19th, 20th. That's absolutely fine. But which will finish the highest in the Premier League this season. And obviously, bonus points if you pick Southampton. Not that I'm biased or anything. I know which club I'm voting for personally. And I'll reveal that when I close the poll. But which promoted club do you think is going to finish the highest in the Premier League this season? Southampton, Ipswich, or Leicester? And as a bit of a bonus, let me know in the chat which of those clubs you think will have the most interesting FPL options this season. And maybe that's a good time to start talking about the prices that we've seen so far for those clubs. Now, we've got Ipswich's 5-man roster already, but let's cast our mind back to a couple of days ago, because I think the second set of prices that was revealed on Thursday was those promoted teams, one from each, was a defender for each of them, but the one that probably took the most attention straight from the off was Leif Davis. Now, Leif Davis was fantastic in the Championship last season. I think he got 2 goals, 21 assists, which for a defender, I don't need to tell you, is absolutely box office. 4.5 was, I think, the only price they could have really put him in at. If they were completely negligent and really messed up, then maybe 4 million might have been a very, very lucky price. But considering the amount of chat about him, I think the FPL price pickers, admins, whatever you want to call them, would have had to be not paying any attention whatsoever for him to come in at anything under 4.5. And I think equally, because he's in a promoted side, pricing him at 5 million would have made him a non-option. So 4.5 I think is very fair. And at times this season, again, like a lot of other players I've mentioned, I think he will be a factor. I don't think he's going to be in my Game Week 1 side, though, because they've got Liverpool followed by Man City in the first 2 game weeks. So maybe it's one that you just keep an eye on, because their opening few fixtures are not great, but they will soften at some point. And Leif Davis is effectively playing left wing for them at times. He is obviously classified as a defender, so it is obviously all in comparison to other defenders, but 4.5 with that sort of underlying attacking data, if he can get anywhere near that this season, he could be good value for money. And the best way that I could possibly summarise him at the moment, in my mind anyway, is imagine if Alfie Doughty played in a blue shirt, basically. And that's a very simplistic way of putting it, but I think at times, like Doughty was last season for us, Leif Davis will be that option for us this season. They won't keep a load of clean sheets, personally, I don't think. I think they conceded 57 last season, which isn't bad, but it's also not box office. Leicester came in, I think, at 43. So that, for context, Leicester are a much better defence. But they will keep the odd clean sheet, you would think, maybe 5 or 6 across the season, maybe even up to 8 or 9. And he will get a few attacking returns as well. So he could be a good option. Now, moving on. Ricardo Pereira, obviously a little bit of an OG FPL player, 4.5 million again. I don't mind it, but again, for me personally, it's a wait and see. And I'm not that interested in him from the off just yet. The player I am more interested in, if I can find him, and I'm sure you can guess, this is now the part of the show that you can all probably leave, because I'm going to talk about Southampton for 2 or 3 minutes, is going to be Harwood Bellis. Now, I mentioned yesterday on Twitter, or X, whatever the hell you want to call it now, that at 4 million, we've now got ourselves a nailed starter in FPL. And I will stand by that. He started, I believe, was it every single one of our games last season? It was certainly close to every one of our games last season. I think it was, but 4 million for a player that we absolutely adore at Southampton. We absolutely love him. Came over from City, so he's got plenty of pedigree, played for Burnley the season before that in their promotion side as well. So he's a very reliable defender. We looked much better last season with him in the side. 4 million is fantastic value for money for any player. And as long as he's a starter, I think for me, he's going to be that 15th man for me from the off. Southampton also do have very good fixtures to start off the season with, so I'm pretty happy to own Harwood Bellis, definitely as a bench option, but an option nevertheless. Now, obviously, the asterisk that I should mention with Harwood Bellis is Southampton generally are still not an amazing defence. We conceded, I think, 63 goals in 46 Championship games last season. It's not absolutely awful, but when you translate that into Premier League football, we're going to be a pretty leaky defence again. I don't think there's any question about that. Our number one keeper is still out injured. McCarthy is likely to be the starter. We might be losing Walker-Peters as well. So there is going to be a bit of turnover in our back line. So whether or not he's going to be a player that we can reliably hope for clean sheets from is going to be difficult to predict. I would say probably not, but 4 million is still good value for money, and I would not put anyone off of owning him. For me, he's a 90-minute man. He does come up for set pieces, gets the odd goal from them as well. I think he got 2 goals, 3 assists last season in the Championship, so it's not absolutely nothing. Overall, I couldn't really rate him higher as a 4 million option. I think he will be the 4 million option I go for in my team, but let's not expect miracles like the likes of Lundstrom or anything. He's not going to be bombing forward with the ball and scoring 30-yarders. This is a centre-back, will come up for corners, maybe get the odd clean sheet, but I think at 4 million, he's a good option. Now, we don't actually have any other full price releases other than Ipswich at the moment for the promoted side. So let me just dive over to... Oh no, we've already looked at Leicester. Sorry, we don't have any other Southampton ones, but we do have Ipswich ones. So let's have a quick look at Ipswich before we start looking at the forward line, because we need to start looking at them a little bit more as well. Now, out of the Ipswich players, I wonder if any Ipswich fans are in the chat, actually. If you are, please do make yourself known. I'd love to hear from you. But Hutchinson's the one that takes my eye here more often than any of the other, or more so than any of the other players. Now, 5.5 million, I think, is a decent price. It's not box office, it's not amazing, but I think it's absolutely fine. I think it was 10 goals, 6 assists in the Championship last season, and you'd expect him to be improving as a player year on year. They've signed him permanently now, I believe, and I think he will be one of their talismanic figures. So Hutchinson, I think out of those options is probably the most interesting, but I don't want to waste or spend a lot of time on these because I'm very well aware that there are good budget options outside of the promoted clubs that are probably going to be more reliable across the season. And maybe at times the Hutchinson or maybe even Chaplin are options, but generally speaking, I don't think they're going to be in our starting 11 all too often. Now, I'm going to end the poll because we're wrapping up the promoted side chat at the moment. So whilst I end the poll, let's have a quick drink because I'm really thirsty. Sorry about that. But so out of the promoted sides, no surprises there. You have completely predicted what I would as well, Leicester to finish the top of the 3 promoted sides. So bonus points to the 17% of you that went with Southampton. I do appreciate you. But if we're being fair, I think Leicester are probably the best equipped, even under new management, to tackle the Premier League. They look like a Premier League side, and I think them going down last season was a bit of a misnomer. It was unfortunate, but I don't think it really ruins their trajectory overall. If anything, it gave them a nice reset and it enabled them to get rid of a few of maybe their older players and maybe higher wage bill players and bring in some young blood and reshape their squad ready for another Premier League charge. And I think that's what they've done. And personally, even under new management, I think they'll do pretty decently in the Premier League. I think they'll come maybe 13th, 14th, maybe 15th, 16th, but I think they'll survive, and I think they'll do better than Ipswich and Southampton. I would love to say that I'm confident Southampton will survive. I hope we do, and I'm obviously going to back us, but it will be a tough season for both Ipswich and Southampton. The systems that Southampton in particular do play will concede quite a few goals, will also score quite a few goals, but it'll be really interesting to see how that translates to Premier League football. And no matter what happens, I'm going to back Russell Martin to the hilt. He's a fantastic manager. He's destined for bigger and better things. Hopefully he can do that with us, but I think it's going to be challenging if we don't start bringing in some new faces pretty soon. So fingers crossed. I do like Harwood Bellis. There will be options, and I'm interested to see what Adam Armstrong comes in at, because I think he could be that striker option at maybe, if we're lucky, 5.5 million. That could unlock a lot of other options elsewhere in our 11 by saving that money in the third striker spot, and he was fantastic last season. He was one of the top goal scorers in the league. He was also one of the top assisters in the league and was reliably getting very, very good minutes for us. He struggled in the Premier League last time round, but he was never one of our key men, and under Russell Martin he's been playing a slightly different role in the team, more of a leadership role as well, and I'd be surprised if he wasn't regularly getting 80 plus 90 minutes week in, week out for us this season. He was absolutely fantastic, and I do think he's going to be a decent option, possibly even from game week 1 onwards, because Southampton do get off to a good start fixture-wise in the Premier League. So I don't think there are going to be a ton of options there in any of the promoted sides, but Armstrong, out of all of the promoted sides, alongside Harwood Bellis, are probably the two that I've got my eye on, especially at Southampton as it stands. Now, a couple of questions in the chat. Current Southampton talisman. Hopefully I've just answered that, so sorry for not seeing that sooner. I do think Armstrong is the guy. If Che Adams were to stay, then he could be maybe a decent option. I personally wouldn't go there myself. I've been burnt by him a few times, and it does, for what it's worth, look like he might be off to, I think it was Wolves at last time I checked, but there are a few clubs sniffing around. I think Wolves are the favourites for his signature as it stands. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's playing in a different kit in the Premier League this season. But Armstrong will be the talisman, almost certainly. We've got Ross Stewart as well. Didn't barely get a minute for us last season, but he came in at high regard, with high regard from Sunderland. And maybe he starts nailing down that centre forward spot. And I think FPL, if he was to do so, will underprice him as well. I think he'll be 5 million at most because he barely got a minute for us. And I think he could be one of those options at some point in the season. If he does start getting regular starts, he could be a really good budget pickup. In the meantime, though, Brozier in the chat, not at Southampton anymore, sadly, because he was very good for us. Will Smallbone could be an option at times, not bad, but I don't think he's going to be a player that you can rely on for many attacking returns. Maybe some good appearance points, but outside of that, I'm not so sure the underlying attacking data is really there for him. At times, he does move into deep areas outside the box and pick up shooting positions, but I don't think he'll find those often enough in the Premier League to make him worthwhile. And I think there'll be enough budget options to maybe look elsewhere. But hopefully that's helpful. I will have a more in-depth show on the promoted sides later on in pre-season. So I think maybe for now, let's move on to some of the striking options in the Premier League in FPL rather, this season. Now, there are a couple that I really wanted to mention outside of Haaland, outside of Vardy, outside of Ollie as well. Let's have a look at Mateta alongside Tony and Richarlison and Havertz as well. So I'll leave it on Mateta because this scroll is a bit of a nightmare. You never know what you're going to get. But Mateta at 7.5, I think, is probably a fair price. I don't know what you guys think. Let me know in the chat what you think of Mateta's price, and actually of the other three I just mentioned, Richarlison, Tony, Havertz. Which do you think is the more likely asset for our teams in FPL for the first few game weeks? I personally don't know if it's going to be Mateta. I do like him, decent enough data, but I think maybe there was slight overperformance last season, and I can see him regressing a little bit. Whether or not he's still good value is a different matter. 7.5 is still cheap enough that even if there was some regression, he'd still be very decent. But when you've got the likes of Tony at 7.5 million, Havertz at 8 million, and maybe to a lesser extent Richarlison at cheaper at 7, pardon me, then maybe there are enough other options close enough to his price that he's not going to be nailed into our side. I do like him. But now Palace are without Elise, you just don't quite have that same confidence, in my personal opinion, that he's going to get the service. And maybe it was just a little bit of a hot streak. I don't think it's going to be so much of a hot streak that he's just not going to be an option. But I don't think it's going to be a standout, nailed into our side, second or third striker, for me personally anyway. But do let me know in the chat what you guys think to that. What I do find interesting is Tony at 7.5 million. I think that is a really good price, especially because he's on penalties and because we're also getting rumours that he might be moving to another Premier League side this season. If he were to move to, let's say, I don't know. Maybe a Tottenham. That would be a pretty decent side for him. You would think anyway. Maybe if he was starting up front, 90-minute man on penalties for someone like Spurs, that would be an incredible bit of business. That would be great value for money. I'd really love to see that. So I've got one eye on Tony's price because he might be off. But even if he wasn't, even if he stayed at Brentford, 90-minute man, good underlying data on penalties. He wasn't great at the end of last season, but you'd expect him to take it up another step with a full pre-season with the team. Obviously, he's not got that ban lingering anymore, so he's absolutely fine to start the season. I do really like Tony, and I think a lot of people are going to forget about him because he didn't light the world on fire, set the world on fire at the back end of last season, and I think he's a player that I don't want to completely forget about. Now, Richarlison as well, I don't think I'll be able to find him too easily. Oh, wow, that was lucky. Richarlison at 7, very similar to Tony, I think. At times this season, he could be very, very good value for money if he's a starter for Spurs, obviously out of position. Not out of position anymore. He's being reclassified as a forward, sorry. But that itself could still be a decent option. Very good underlying data. If he gets 90 minutes regularly, there were times last season he was a very good option for us as a midfielder, but as a striker, 1 less point for a goal, but he'll get more bonus points if he does get the goals. So it does kind of balance out a little bit. I don't hate it as an option. It's very much a wait and see for me personally. So with Richarlison, with Tony, with Havertz as well, I think maybe Havertz is the most tempting out of the 4 to start off the season with because he's probably the most reliable, or the one that I probably feel the most confident that he matches last season's performance in. And obviously as a striker as well, Baker 343 on Twitter, do go check him out. He's absolutely fantastic, has above average FPL podcast too, here on Twitter, here on YouTube as well. Did a great thread on Havertz to start the season with as well, and how the reclassification from midfielder to forward would change the points trajectory, I suppose you call it, for Havertz this season. And basically, I still think he's a very good option at 8 million. It's just whether or not Arsenal sign another striker to compete with him, and whether Havertz actually does play out of position. Well, not so much out of position anymore as a forward this season, or whether he drops back into the midfield at times. I personally think 8 million is still very good price for him. So that's a player that I'm very interested in. Let me know, by the way, if there are any players that we haven't seen a price for yet that you'd love me to predict, or maybe you want to predict yourself in the chat. Perhaps someone like Bukayo Saka, perhaps someone like Phil Foden as well. Players that are going to be factors this season that you're hungry to see the price for. Maybe, and I don't know this, maybe we're about to see another price reveal at 3 p.m, for instance. So again, do please give me a shout in the chat if we do, and I'll put it on screen and we can chat about it together. In the meantime, though, I think, unless anyone's got any prices that they want to discuss further, I'm pretty happy to move across to the team planning segment, because we're an hour, just over an hour into the show. So again, I'm kind of just scrolling through these at the moment. Let me know if you want me to pause on any of them. Maybe a quick 2 minutes on Brighton, actually, whilst I'm here. Dunk at 4.5 million under a more conservative manager this season, which it looks like we're going to get. De Zerbi was very, very progressive. Didn't mind so much about the clean sheets. Although the data wasn't actually all that bad either for Brighton. So Dunk at 4.5 and Estupinian at 5 million could be options this season again for us. Especially Dunk at 4.5. I think that is really underpriced. Or I say really, but I think I'm very surprised he didn't come in at a very easy 5 million this season. He's got a good set piece threat. Absolutely nailed into the side historically. And Brighton's data is decent, and they'll be playing under a more conservative manager and not having to worry so much about European football this season either. So I think Dunk could be a really good option. João Pedro as well, another player I'm really interested to see how he lines up this season, whether or not he's locked, whether or not he's on penalties as well. I would say probably yes to both. 5.5 million. If he is locked, and if he's nailed on penalties as well, then that kind of blows my Adam Armstrong theory out of the water. You can just go for João Pedro. Great data. In fact, almost elite data. I'm surprised they priced him at this point. I think that is a serious bargain. I'm surprised he's not 6.5 million personally. I thought that was going to be a pretty easy price point for him to hit. And at 5.5, I can see him being a factor in a lot of our sides this season, and he could easily sneak his way into my starting 11 come game week 1 as well. But yeah, again, Dunk and João Pedro in the chat as well. Very, very interesting. Really, really tempted to go with them at some point this season. Rashford is a really interesting one as well. We haven't got the price for Rashford yet, but cast your mind back 2 or 3 seasons, had a really average to poor season going in, got degraded I think to 6.5 million as a midfielder as well, and absolutely blew that price out of the water 2 seasons ago. I think he hit 200 points, was a captaincy option at times. I think I used my triple captain on him that season, and to good effect as well in a double game week. So Rashford's got pedigree. I can see him getting a price drop after last season's performance as well, and if he comes in at 7.5, I think that could be a really interesting option. So maybe let me know in the chat what you think his price might be. Similarly, let me know what you think Isak and Wilson's prices might be too, because those could be really, really interesting, especially Isak. That's probably the number 1 price. Well, maybe Saka, maybe Foden, maybe Isak. One of those 3 I'm really most interested to see next, because that could really tell us a lot about the structure for our squads going into game week 1, if it's going to be affordable with an extra premium on top of those players as well or not. Now, quick scroll through just in case I've missed any. Kudus at 6.5, I think that's pretty interesting, but maybe not one to talk about for too long right now, considering West Ham's opening run of fixtures. He will be a factor though, and Lopetegui, you would think, will be able to get the best out of him, so I think at times he will be a really interesting option. Gordon we've kind of talked about, Chelsea we've talked about, Brentford, I don't think there's too much there to talk about. Maybe an interesting 4.5 option in defence with Ben Mee, or Flecken in goal at 4.5 might not be a bad shout. Brentford's defensive data historically is pretty decent too, even if the keeper quality hasn't been the best. So maybe 4.5 could be decent there as a budget pickup. Wolves, again, Ait-Nouri and Dawson at 4.5. I think it kind of makes the promoted sides defenders at 4.5, like Leif Davis, for instance, kind of irrelevant from the off, because if Ait-Nouri, Dunk, Konza, Dawson are all at 4.5 as well, with Premier League pedigree, some of them have really good attacking upside, and more likely to keep higher amounts of clean sheets as well, it's going to be difficult to look past them from the off. Wolves' opening run of fixtures, though, is absolutely awful. I think their first 8 game weeks are the worst on in the Premier League. So that might be one to maybe just wait and see on, although at 4.5, you could probably put one of them on the bench for a couple of weeks, maybe bring them in for the odd game. Ait-Nouri, at times, played out of position, almost in the forward line for Wolves. So at 4.5 million, that is a very, very good price, and he will undoubtedly be in our sides at some point this season too. I also don't mind Cunha at 6.5 up front, but now we've seen the likes of João Pedro at 5.5, I think it's unlikely I go there, especially from the off because of the fixtures. But also, if there's more value on a penalty taker at Brighton, I will probably go there instead. But that doesn't mean he's a bad option in his on his own merit either. Okay, so we've had some Bournemouth price reveals. I'm going to get that up on the second screen now. Let's see if the Premier League FPL rather, have put that up on their main channel, or whether Bournemouth did it privately, because that could be the deciding factor. Bournemouth prices, let's have a look. Oh, I can't see them at the moment. Where does anyone know where they've released them? I assume it'll be on Bournemouth's channel. Aha, here we go. Yeah, got them. Right, let's go back over. So, interesting that Scott McTominay's trending, by the way. I think he's off to Galatasaray or something, isn't he? Anyway, maybe a conversation for another day. Price reveals. Solanke at 7.5. I quite like that. I think that's decent. 7.5, penalty taker, 90 minutes, second season. under Iraola as well. I do quite like that. I can see that working out pretty nicely. Had a very good season. Some maybe considered him slightly unfortunate not to be in the reckoning for England. Yeah, I can see that working out very, very well. So yeah, 7.5 on Solanke. I'm not hyper confident on what Bournemouth's run of fixtures at the start of the season is. Let me have a quick look here. Bournemouth start off, sorry, I know this isn't cropped correctly, that's my bad, but where my mouse is, with Nottingham Forest, Newcastle, Everton, Chelsea, Liverpool, Southampton. Mediocre, not amazing, but certainly not something that would put me off Solanke if I wanted him anyway, because as we know, strikers if they're a good striker, they can kind of score against anyone, especially if they're on penalties as well. There's an element of randomness to it, and I think with Solanke, you can see him scoring against even the best of the side. So again, 7.5 million wouldn't put anyone off of that whatsoever. And putting him in the same category as Tony, as Mateta, as Richarlison, as Havertz, within the realms of 0.5 million at least, makes it a really interesting price point for forwards this season. And I think 3-4-3 is going to be really popular for that reason. There's a lot of strikers out there that are going to be interesting, considering we've only got 3 slots. So yeah, I think Solanke could be very much an option. I don't know about any of the other options. Tavernier at 5.5, and then 4.5s on Kirkes and Zabani. Yeah, maybe. Again, it's other 4.5s that might be interesting at times this season, and it just adds that extra layer of defenders to the pile ahead of the promoted side. So whether or not you go with a Bournemouth defender, for instance, at 4.5 is a different matter, but knowing that we've got that many different options at 4.5 that are going to be decent probably puts the likes of Leicester defenders, Ipswich defenders, Southampton defenders down another notch, and makes it less likely that we're going to go with them unless it's literally just bench fodder at 4 million, like a Harwood Bellis, for instance. That's my personal opinion on the Bournemouth players and the defensive situation as a whole at the moment anyway. So I think I was just about to wrap up the prices so far this season, but again, let me know in the chat if there's anyone I haven't talked about. Maybe it's worth doing 2 minutes on Eze and Kamada. And I've forgotten all about the fact that Gahey's at 4.5 as a defender, so add him to the pile as well as a really good defender. Obviously England hero now as well, decent goal threat from set pieces at least, and the fact that he's nailed in a side that has a pretty good underlying data for defensive wise anyway. But let's talk about Eze and Kamada very quickly. Eze at 7 million, I think, is good value for money. Coming in 0.5 less than likes of Gordon, likes of Bowen, makes him all the more interesting. Decent underlying data and on set pieces as well, and has less competition in set pieces because Elise's gone too. Eze is, for me, a really good value pickup, and I could definitely see my way to having him in my Game Week 1 side. Kamada, though, now he's a player that maybe a few FPL managers won't be so familiar with, but I think by the end of this season we will be very much so. 5.5 million for what is maybe not a direct replacement for Elise. I don't think anyone would argue that, but Kamada's got plenty of high grade pedigree, and I think he can fit into Crystal Palace's style of play very well. He's got good underlying attacking data historically, and he's had a couple of seasons under Glasner in the past as well. So it's very clear what's happened here. Glasner's come in towards the end of last season, and straight away is like, right, I trust Kamada, I trust my boys, bring him in, he's going to do a good job in the Premier League, I've seen the system, he'll fit this, and he can be the guy to take us up another step this year. And at 5.5 million, for the underlying data that I've seen, I think it's around 0.6 XGI per 90. I think he could be a very, very good budget pickup at that price in midfield. So keep an eye out for him. And okay, maybe we go with Eze just to be safer from the off because we know what Eze can do in the Premier League. But Kamada could easily get up to 6 million this season if he gets off to a flyer, and he'd still be good value at that price as well if he's what I think he could be. So yeah, definitely keep an eye on Palace, definitely keep an eye on Kamada as well, and just generally Palace's performance at the back end of last season was absolutely amazing, and I do expect them to not necessarily match that next season, but definitely take it up a notch generally for next season in comparison to where they finished last season, because they've got their first full season under Glasner. the vibe, the atmosphere at Selhurst Park right now is absolutely amazing. Even if they've lost Elise, I still expect them to be a force. So yeah, I think more than happy to recommend Eze and Kamada, and to a lesser extent Gehi as well at the back. I think we're pretty much through now. So what I was going to do, unless again we can bring this back at some point if there are any other price reveals, if there's any other players that you want to talk about, but I did want to do an exclusive, let's call it an exclusive, first draft via FPL.team, live on the stream at the moment, and I genuinely have not even thought to create a draft so far, and I wanted to do this together with you guys because, one, you can help me hopefully build my side out. Two, we can start talking about some of the predicted prices together as well, because there's a number of players that we haven't seen so far. So let's have maybe a look at some of the more locked picks for game week 1 at the moment. And I think overall, for me, Mo Salah is probably going to be a player that I'm pretty happy to own in game week 1. So let's take off trialist number 1 and put in Mo Salah. Now, the reason for that is quite simple, really. That is because Mo Salah will be playing Ipswich away from home. Liverpool usually get off to a flyer. It's usually in part because they're playing a promoted club. It seems to be quite fortunate for them that they get it year after year. They've got that again this year. And Salah, we know the data's fantastic. I think 12.5 is a fair price. I don't think it's a good price. I don't think it's a bad one. I think it's fair. And personally, for me, I think it would be taking a bit of a gamble to go without him in game week 1, knowing what he's capable of, knowing even though it's under a new manager, knowing the position he'll most likely be playing in, and the fact that it is against the promoted side. So I think Salah, I don't think too many of you will be complaining about that, but let me know in the chat if you do disagree with any of these. The second player that I think for me definitely goes in is Alexander Isak. Now, I've already talked a lot about Southampton in this stream, so I won't continue to do so, but Newcastle getting off to a good start at home against a promoted side is going to be very high on their radar. They're going to want to get off to a stormer. They're going to be fresh as well. Isak will have had the summer off. Sweden not involved in any sort of international tournaments or anything like that. So he'll have a decent pre-season. You'd expect him to be fully fit and firing. Newcastle will be fresh, and they'll want to get off to a good start against Southampton. Southampton leaky at the back with second choice keeper, probably one or two new bits and bobs in their back line as well. Isak, great underlying data on penalties. I just cannot see past it. I really can't. So Isak for me, maybe, arguably, even a captaincy shout. And maybe that's something that we look at towards the start of the season. But I really don't hate it as a differential option. Someone that we know a lot more about because we know the manager, we know the system that they're going to play than we do on than a Salah, for instance, because he's under that new coach. So that could be one argument. And again, let me know in the chat what you think of the captaincy in game week 1. I would probably still go with Salah to start with right now, but I think there's definitely an argument for Isak. And yeah, I can see my way to doing it. Now, for what it's worth, I think just for a bit of fun more than anything else on this stream today, I'm going to build this without Haaland, just almost as a proof of what sort of side you can build without Haaland, and then we can kind of weigh up whether or not we think it's going to be worthwhile having a more balanced side without Haaland, or squeezing Haaland in, and I'll bring Haaland in at the end to see whether or not there are too many sacrifices that need to be made structurally. So we'll do it that way round. I hope that's okay. Let me know in the chat what you think of that. We're seeing a couple of requests for Nkunku. So again, Nkunku is going to be a risk, but I'll put him in for now. In fact, actually, no, I won't. But the reason I won't is we can use him as one of those sacrifices later on. What I'll do is I'll go with my gut and I'll have Palmer in from the off. Even though, and I'm sorry, Niels, I am sorry about that. I will put in Nkunku at some point. But Palmer, even though it's Man City from the off, they've got a good start after that. He is on penalties, and I also want to see structurally how difficult it is to build this side with Salah and Palmer and Isak, for instance. So we'll do it that way round. So Palmer is in for now. If we need to downgrade to Nkunku, we'll do so as it happens. So another player that I would be very interested in would be, actually, in fact, let's have a look at defenders to start with, and we'll start building backwards. So I think for me, another player that is very likely to feature in my 15, not in my 11, in my 15, would be Harwood Bellis. Hang on, I've clicked the wrong button. There we go. So I'd be very surprised if he wasn't in there. So that's now 4 players, and he's going to come in at 4 million. So that's going to take up none of my budget, or very little of my budget. And I'm going for now to start off in goal with Pickford. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because it gives me that 0.5 to save later on if I'm 0.5 shy. I'm going to build it probably on the more expensive side, see how much I can push, and then we can bring it down a notch after that. So Pickford, I think absolutely fine. And then maybe I'm just going to put in, because I don't want to bore anyone to death, I'm just going to put in a random 4 million predicted price goalkeeper for the time being, just so we don't waste too much time on it. Now, again, this is already looking pretty decent, but already we've taken up nearly half of our budget, and we've put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players, 9 to go. So we do need some budget options coming in pretty urgently. But for the meantime, let's keep going. Let's see what we can do. One player that I'd love to have straight from the off as well, probably in that third striker slot, and I will build it in a way that we can see the structure of the pricing, is João Pedro. Now, I think he's going to be great value for money. Let's have a look at those opening fixtures. Everton, United, I'm not too scared of that. Arsenal's tough, followed by 2 home fixtures against Ipswich and Nottingham Forest. I really quite like that. I'm really happy with that. And because he's 5.5 million, that gives us that security, that extra money to spend on that second striker slot. And that can be someone like a Watkins or a Tony, possibly elsewhere as well. You could look at Havertz. Speaking of, let's try and push the boat out and put in Saka from the off. Now, we don't know his price unless there's been a reveal whilst I've been streaming. Now, Pete at FPL Team has done a fantastic job of putting in the predicted prices, but he's put Saka in at 9.5. Now, I think personally, he's going to come in at, if not the same as Palmer, very close. I think he's going to come in at 10, 10.5, maybe even 11 if we're unlucky. But I think he's going to be one of those premium assets as well this season, considering his pedigree. Recently, obviously last season was fantastic, but even before that as well, he was getting great numbers, very, very strong point scoring seasons. I think he will come in at a very high price. So this might be with a bit of an asterisk that it's quite difficult to do, because it could be an extra million on top for the likes of Saka. But for the time being, like I said, we're going to build it expensive and we're going to downgrade and see what we can do there. So I don't think it would be wise to go in without any Arsenal defenders. So maybe we have a look at someone like a Saliba. I mean, predicted price at 6 million. What's Gabriel? 6 million as well. I think maybe Gabriel's added threat from set pieces might be of interest to me. I think for what it's worth, he probably will come in at 6 million. So I think he's got that one right. But as you can see, now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players left and 33.5 million to spend. So it's already getting pretty tight, and we don't have Haaland in the side either. What we have done is picked 3 what I would assume to be middle class premiums of Salah, Palmer, Saka, and Isak, who will come in at a pretty decent price as well. I haven't actually checked what price Pete's put him at here, at 8.5. I think that's fair. I think 8.5 is probably about fair. So we haven't got any Man City players yet. So again, this is really stretching the budget, but Phil Foden's going to be very popular. And that completes a 4-man midfield of Salah, Palmer, Saka, Foden. That is incredibly strong and probably very, very difficult to actually achieve. We're probably going to have to sacrifice at least one of them to make this draft work, even without Haaland. But again, like I said, for the time being, I do really like Foden. All of those 4 players, I don't think anyone's going to complain about them on their own merit. It's whether or not you can have all of them. And I think that's going to be very, very tough to do. So again, a mention for Man City defenders in the chat. I think Gvardiol will be the obvious one. Pete's priced him at 6.5. That's going to be really, really expensive. I think he'll probably come in at 6, maybe, if we're lucky, but maybe 6.5. It's certainly possible. And as you can see, with all of these players already in, 17.5 million left with 1, 2, 3, 4 slots left to fill, it's just not going to be doable. So I think straight away that 5th midfielder is going to have to be a budget midfielder. We don't know who yet, but there will be 1 or 2 coming in at 4.5 that are going to be decent enough. It's hard to tell yet without the full prices which one that is going to end up being. But maybe for the time being, I'll put in a holding one, and between me and you, we know that it's going to be hopefully someone with a little bit of pedigree. We'll put in Saar for now. How about we put in Saar? We can do that. We can put in Saar. And okay, he's not an attacking midfielder. He's not got plenty of pedigree, but we're kind of hoping that at least one 4.5 million midfielder, even if it's from a promoted side, comes in and could be decent value for money. And then all of a sudden we've got 13 million to play with for 2 defenders, probably coming both in at 4.5, and then we've only got 4 million to play with for that final striker spot. So we're going to have to make a downgrade. But for the time being, I like Gahey. I've spelled that wrong. Gahey at 4.5. I think that's a very decent price. And I also really like Dunk at 4.5 as well. I would put in Ait Nouri, but the fixtures to start with are just not very good, and I prefer to move on to him at some point rather than have him to start with. So already we've got 14 out of 15, 4 million left to use on a striker. Pardon me. So we're quite simply just going to have to make a downgrade. So I think out of these, because we don't have any coverage on Man City or Arsenal midfielders otherwise, I'm not that willing to make that downgrade. So maybe for the time being, we are going to make that Palmer downgrade to Nkunku, save ourselves 4 million, which is a lot. It's a lot to save. And that all of a sudden means that we can bring in a really strong third striker. Now, we've got up to 8 million to spend. So the only two strikers we can't afford are Watkins and Haaland. Now, I would love Watkins, and it's quite tough to go without him, to be honest. But looking at this, I think the one that actually is tempting me the most right now is probably Solanke. Nottingham Forest, Newcastle, Everton, Chelsea, Liverpool under new management, Southampton at home. I really don't mind that. And okay, he's got this priced incorrectly at 7 million. He's coming at 7.5. We can still afford it. Obviously, there are a few guesses here, but we can still afford it. And looking at this, we've got 1 million spare. That 1 million probably goes on Saka, by the way, because Saka's probably underpriced. But probably just about doable. Like, that is a pretty well-rounded draft. You've got 2 strong defenders, followed by a pairing of slightly weaker 4.5s that you can rotate. You've got a backup defender in Harwood Bellis that will start, that can come in once every few game weeks if you absolutely need it. You've got a good keeper, and hopefully that 4 million keeper is a starting keeper. We don't know who that will be yet, but hopefully one of the 4 million keepers ends up being a starter. And then in midfield, I think that's a strong 4, albeit without Palmer. That is quite a tough choice to make, and maybe you do some other fiddling somewhere else, and maybe you downgrade Gvardiol and Gabriel, you keep Palmer as he is, and maybe downgrade Saka to an Ødegaard, for instance, who also gets good underlying data. That could be possible. But overall, I think it's fairly well balanced, that the price points are pretty well covered as well. It keeps us with a 10.5 of Saka or Palmer. It keeps us with someone just under that, the likes of Foden, who could be pretty much anyone. It could be Bruno. very easily instead of Foden, who is on penalties, as Niels says in the chat as well. And also, we can always downgrade one of the strikers as well. So I think it's pretty well balanced. But what is really, really clear this season, whatever you do, is that having a strong 15 is going to be very, very difficult given the premium pricing on a lot of these players. So Saka getting the price rise, Foden getting the price rise, Palmer getting the price rise, Haaland getting the price rise is going to put a real squeeze on our budget. And we're going to have to look for those edges, those edge pieces, the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th players in our squads being much more important to us than it has been previously. And a lot more tough decisions need to be made than have been required previously because of those price points. And I actually really like that. Again, that might not be for everyone. Some managers who maybe not into FPL or into the Premier League as much as people in this chat might not enjoy that as much because they can't pick all of the players that they know and love. But I think for the more engaged managers that really like the challenge of FPL, this is good news, I personally think, because we're going to get some edge pieces. There's going to be a lot of 50-50 choices this season. Palmer or Saka, Foden or Son, who we haven't even talked about today. Bruno as well in the mix there. Isak or Watkins or Solanke or Tony. Loads and loads of different choices need to be made, and we can't have them all. So I think that probably is a good note to end on. We've been an hour and a half on this stream. That's 90 minutes. I do have one more question before I go, but I think as a note to end on, I'm feeling really, really positive about FPL this season. I think it's going to be a really fun season. I think we're going to get some sort of new feature this season. We don't know what that will be yet, but I personally think it will be a limitless chip. That I have no intel, I have no inside information, but based on the player pricing, what I'd love to see is bench boost go bye-bye, because I hate the bench boost. I think a lot of managers do, because it takes up so much planning and focus for the season with very little reward. But if we remove something like that, we could have something like a limitless chip where for 1 week only it's a free hit, but with limitless budget. So we can have all of these players just for 1 week. And I really like the sound of that, especially this season. We won't have as many double game weeks. So that's another thing that we need to consider in our chip strategy. And this isn't a chip strategy show, so we're not going to go into that today, but I will start talking about that in the preseason. And just as I say that, I realise I haven't once asked you to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you're still watching now, first of all, thank you. It's been an hour and a half. I do really appreciate it. And my ramblings aren't for everyone. So thank you so much for listening in. If you are, hopefully you've enjoyed it, and hopefully it's been worth leaving a like and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already done so. So I think personally, FPL this season is going to be really good fun. I think we're in for a bit of a wild ride, and hopefully whatever feature comes is going to be really interesting. And the final thing that I want to bring up, I'm not going to put a poll up now because I'm going to close the stream in a few minutes. But the final question I wanted to bring up is leave in the chat whether you think it's coming home or it's going to Spain. That's it. That's the whole thing. Leave it in the chat. If you get this far into the show, are we in for a wild night tomorrow? Are we going to be celebrating into the early hours of Monday? Or is it going back to Spain again? And I don't know. I've got a gut feeling. I think we might be able to do it this time. Although, as I said at the start of the stream, my parents are living in Spain, have done for 8 years, so I go there quite a lot. So if England weren't in the final, I'd be supporting Spain, put it that way. But England are in the final, so colours to the mast, it's got to be England. Come on, it's got to be. It's got to finally happen. Anyway, I'm definitely rambling on now. Thank you all for watching. Really, really enjoyed it. Hopefully that's been useful to you. And as always, I will be back very, very soon with other videos. The game will launch very soon. I'll come out with a proper draft as soon as it launches, a proper draft video with some more thought attached to it. And of course, properly look at the fixtures, some underpriced gems, the promoted clubs. I've got loads and loads of content coming this season. I'm hoping to ramp it up from last season, hopefully bigger and better than ever. So your support, as always, is really, really appreciated. In the meantime, though, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. And it's good to be back. It's good to have FPL back in our lives, and I'll see you again soon for the next video in the next few days.